Chapter 11, Exile, May 1906 to September 1909, begins on page 257. A demon week later, Father and I moved across the bay to a place in the foothills above Oakland. We used Miss Whitlaw's wagon, taking it across on the ferry. Later, Father would return it to the Tang men in San Francisco who had agreed to buy it. The wagon rattled up a dirt path to a plateau halfway up a hillside. The winds roared so loudly about us that Father had to shout to me. "Feel those winds, Moonshadow?" Father asked. "Aren't they beautiful? They'll help us when we try to launch the flying machine." I tried my best to hold on to my hat. "Are they like this in the wintertime?" "I guess so," Father said. "In fact, I hope so. We'll be testing our models every clear day." I said nothing because I didn't want to spoil Father's enthusiasm. As the wagon rolled on, Father went on making plans. In his own mind, he was already flying. Father took the path that led away from the roadway. Eventually, we came to an old iron fence covered with a tangle of weeds and shrubs. I suppose at one time there had been a gate over the path, but someone had taken it away. Father told me that we were living on what had once been a rich estate belonging to the Esperanza family. At first, we were surrounded by former orchards of apple and cherry and apricot trees that had now become wild. I found out later that their fruit was too small and bitter and full of worms to be eaten. But right then, the trees filled the air with the sweet, promising scent of blossoms. Past the orchards in the middle of the estate was a garden that must have covered nearly 10 acres. It seemed as if the garden held every type of flower, bush, herb, and tree in the demon land. But because no gardener watched them now, grew helter-skelter in a riot of color and greenery. Finally, Father stopped the wagon before two large, ramshackle buildings. I looked at the larger one, which seemed to have once been a mansion constructed in the demon style. "Are we going to live in that?" I asked doubtfully. "In that old ruin?" Father laughed and pointed out the places on the sides where some scavengers had already taken the boards away. The panes of glass in the windows had been either broken or stolen, and the roof had begun to cave in. Father nodded at the other building, a large one of plain, straight design. It was about 2 stories high, but there were only a few windows at the level of the first story. "No, sir, we're living in the barn." When we first walked into the barn, the smell nearly knocked me down. Father set down his box of ammonia and disinfectants. I had wondered why he had spent so much money on them, but now I knew. The barn was awfully drafty too, but I guess I ought to be grateful that it was. We scrubbed and soaked and tried almost everything to get rid of the smell of horses and manure, but even after a day's work, we did not quite manage it. Disappointed, Father said, "Maybe this will help." He went over the left wall of the barn where the stable hand had once slept in a little walled-off section. There was a pot-bellied stove there and a pipe leading from it to the wall that let out smoke. There was already a shelf on part of the wall. Father put Uncle's cup of soil there and slipped a dozen incense sticks into it and lit them. Little plumes of smoke, thick as worms, began to writhe in the air. "There," he said, stepping back. "If we can't chase out the smell, maybe we can cover it up." "Yes, sir." I rolled my sleeves back down after washing my arms and hands. Somehow, I knew that the incense would never quite get the smell out. I set a board over 2 empty boxes and then rummaged around in our things until I found the paper, ink, and inkwell. Then I got some water from the pump outside. "What are you doing?" Father asked. "I'm getting things ready for a letter to Mother. We haven't written her yet telling her about our change in plans. The last thing she'd heard is that we were in the Tang people's town helping the company to rebuild the store. I thought if we wrote a letter this afternoon, you could mail it when you went back to return the wagon." Father sat down reluctantly on the dirt floor before the board. "I can just hear the school teacher now telling everyone in the village. It's Mother who has to listen to them laughing," I pointed out. "I wish I could spare her that." Father chewed the end of the brush's wooden handle. "We have the easy part. All we have to do is fly. She has to live in the village." Saying that, he began to write. Father worked as a handyman or an all-around mechanic when he could, but he would cut firewood or do almost anything so long as it was legal and it paid. I managed to get a job as a delivery boy for a grocer, but it meant I did not talk much with Father. By the time I got home, cooked dinner, and did my lessons and my chores, I would be so tired that I'd go right to bed. Eventually, I wound up running our household, or maybe our barnhold is a better word. Among other things, I planned our meals, washed our clothes, kept the barn as clean as I could under the circumstances, and oversaw the budget once Father showed me how to do it. That left Father all his free time to work on flying. Somehow, we managed to send some money home, too. Once a month on a Sunday, I walked down into Oakland and rode the trolley to the ferry depot where I would join a lot of other tangmen, houseboys, and other day workers. From there, we would ride the ferry boat over to San Francisco. Father never went because he didn't want to waste any of his free time. Once I was in the Tang people's town, I would deposit our money with the district association and pick up letters. Sometimes there were notes from Handclap or White Deer, who would convey Lefty's regards since Lefty himself could no longer write. Then I would finish shopping and start the long trip back home, arriving late in the evening, usually to find Father bent over the table, working feverishly at the plans or finishing some model he was going to test. I don't know whether the smell of the barn got less or our noses grew used to it, but after a while we stopped noticing it. Spring turned into summer, and the grass in the garden changed into a ruddy gold color. When you walked through the orchards, the air was thick with the sickly sweet smell of fruit rotting on the ground. It was not until early August that we received a reply from Mother and Grandmother concerning Father's revelations. It was a thick envelope, so I had expected several pages, mostly from Grandmother scolding us. But when Father opened it, there was only one single sheet and a second, smaller envelope. He spread the sheet out quickly on the tabletop and began to read out loud. I sat across from him, fiddling with my own writing brush while I listened. As we expected, Grandmother called Father a fool who was a disgrace to the family, both the living and the dead, and so on. I was surprised that the schoolmaster's brush had not burned up, but she again warned us to watch out for the water in our own new demon home, so I suppose she had not totally turned her back on us. As also could be expected, Mother was patient and understanding, saying what a truly wonderful thing it was to meet the Dragon King. Father picked up the second, smaller envelope and slid it over the table to me. "It's for you," he said, puzzled. I reached over and turned up the light from the kerosene lamp. Sure enough, my name was on it. It was the first time I had ever had a letter addressed only to me. Father drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "Well, aren't you going to open it?" "Yes, of course." I hastily tore open the envelope and slipped out the thin rice paper sheet. I read the letter silently. "It is very hard to say these things by the hand of another. I long to hold you, but the only comfort I can offer are these words which I myself cannot write. But though the words are written by another, they are my words nonetheless. Above everything else, you must not show this letter to your father, for I must tell you some things about him. First of all, I knew he was an unusual man when I married him, but I had no idea he had once been the physician to the Dragon King himself. I do not care what the others say. I am bursting with pride right now. But this brings me to the second thing. I wish more than ever that I could be with you right now, for your father has undertaken no small task. But since I cannot be there, you must love him doubly hard. You must give him not only your own support, but also try to give him mine as well. It is a great deal to ask of you, but I know you will be able to do it. I have not seen you now for 4 difficult, impossible years, and yet from your letters I feel that you are still the child I love, and that you will soon be a man that I can be proud of." At the bottom of the letter was Mother's name. I read through the letter several times, feeling suddenly very sad and tired. I had not really thought about my mother in a long time. "Well," Father demanded impatiently, "what does your mother say? I suppose it must be your mother. Your grandmother would never waste money on a second letter." I folded the letter and put it carefully back into its envelope. "I think she understands, sir, about not telling her your dream and about the delay in bringing her over." Father pointed at the envelope still in my hands. "Does she say it in there?" He looked as if he were eager to read it. "No, sir, but that's what she means." "How do you know?" "We used to figure out what to put in each one of our letters to you. I know what she'd say and what she wouldn't." Father massaged his forehead. "How long has it been since I've seen her?" he asked himself. "I think almost 12 years. Why do we want to bother with flying anyway?" White Deer says that you can only follow the course of your own nature. I got up and poured a cup of tea for Father and set it down in front of him. I wished Mother were there. She would have known the right things to say, but as it was, I had to try to stumble through in my own clumsy way. And who knows? Maybe one of these days we'll fly back across the sea and pick her up. Father laughed and seemed to relax. I'm afraid that Handclap's more likely to build that kind of machine than me. I'll be happy if I can just stay in the air for a few minutes. But you could tell he felt better. He gulped down the tea. Well, we'd better be getting back to work. Then it was fall, and the rains came. The trees of the orchard began to lose their leaves and look like sheep huddling against the fence, and new grass and flowers began to shove their way up through the now old and dried-out growths in the garden. When I could, I would spend a lot of time outside, sitting on an old crate by the side of the barn, watching the fog drift in close through the trees, snagging on the branches, or crawling cat-like through the garden. It was about the same temperature whether I was inside or outside the barn. We had done our best to repair the holes in the roof, but there was still 1 or 2 little leaks that dribbled all the time. We had no spare money to replace the broken panes of glass in the windows, but we did the next best thing by taping some heavy paper over the holes and oiling the paper so it became translucent. It helped cut the wind down some, but still let in the light. We'd also tried to cover up the spaces between the boards with mud and straw, but even so, the wind would get through into the barn. And the place was so huge that we could never quite warm it up. By now, Father had hung huge models of the flying machines, some up to 6 feet in wingspan, from the rafters, and these would twist and turn as if they were giant captive moths. But winter was my favorite time to be outside, on those special days when the rain stopped and the fog had burned away. The air had been washed clear of any soot or dust or smoke, and the whole world seemed fresh and crystal sharp. I could look out then and see the city of Oakland lying stretched out at the foot of the hill, all the houses looking like toy blocks. And beyond Oakland was the bay, smooth as a pane of green glass. On any sunny day, you could see sailboats gliding over the surface, leaving fine white lines behind them that were their wakes. Their sails would belly out full and white before the wind, and the breeze would rise up from the bay, cool and salty, passing over the hissing grass. And beyond the bay was the city, the only city as far as I was concerned. In the next 3 years, I watched as much of it was restored. The ships would lie at anchor by the wharfs like lazy water bugs. You could see the streets tilting skywards and the houses scattered over them like varicolored beads. And the brightest cluster of beads was the Tang people's town. It was as if the earthquake had only been a bad dream. But if the view in the daylight was good, the view by moonlight was even better. Then all the lights in the houses burned. Below our hill, the lights of Oakland would gleam like a cloud of fireflies, and the wrinkling waters of the bay would turn to quicksilver under the moon. And beyond the bay, beyond even the ships with the lights hung on their sides, would be the lights of San Francisco. Thousands and thousands of kerosene or gas lamps glittering like the gold scales of a serpent. It was like a river of light, and each light represented a person, or maybe several people, the lights of their homes or the street lights outside them. And I did not think of them as scrabbling for money or being stupid or malicious. It was as if they had each become a tiny star shining in the darkness. I had found my mountain of gold after all, and it had not been nuggets but people who made it up, people like the company and the Whitlaws. I had not realized until I had left it that I had been on the mountain of gold all that time. And somehow, being on our hillside, I felt above it all now. Somehow freer and purer, working toward the fulfillment of Father's dream. Somehow, all the worries and fears of the past seemed small and petty now.